Did it say anything yet?
Yes, it did. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Oops, I hit a button and went forward. I think.
Morning.
My name is Paige Weiskirch, and welcome to Jam Session, the Science of Sweet Treats. We're going to get started here. We're still admitting people, but we're going to go ahead and start with a few introductions while we wait for the last few to join us. My name is Paige Weiskirch. I will be your MC and presenter today. We have a Q&A monitor. Is going to be Robin Barker, and in a minute I'll explain more about what that entails. And then our panelists today are myself, Penny Pearson, Cindy Coates, and Tina Schumann. And we're going to chat today about kind of what makes really jam and jelly and all those other sweet spreads work. Like, what's the science? A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please keep your mics muted when you're not speaking, just to avoid the cross-traffic noise. During our live, we'll have some opportunities for live questions. And so when we get to that, feel free to unmute and speak or raise your Zoom hand. You should, if you don't know where your Zoom hand is, if you see the react button at the bottom of your screen in the menu bar, you should see that and then raise hand. If you don't, and then also next to that, you'll see the Q&A. So you can open that up and type in questions. If you prefer to do that, should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see it, you may need to select the more option on your menu, and then you should see both the Q&A and the other options from the menu. So, and again, during open discussions, feel free to speak up or just raise your Zoom hand, and Robin will forward your questions to the panel. Who are we? So we are all volunteers with the UC Master Food Preservers online delivery program. We're a community outreach volunteer program. We are grant funded and under the auspices of the University of California Division of Ag and Natural Resources, and we provide up-to-date research-based information on food safety and preservation. Our mission is to keep Californians safe and well as they use appropriate research-based practices to safely preserve food. So that's why we're here. We're all volunteers. And a disclaimer. So as volunteers, we do not speak for the University of California. We don't endorse or oppose any specific organization, product, or service on behalf of the University of California. We may mention products during our presentation, but they should not be considered an endorsement in any way. And any product we don't mention should not be perceived as an opposition to that product. Before we begin, we always like to start off with a little reminder about cleaning. And that's been in the news a lot lately, so I think everybody understands. Microorganisms can cause illness, bottom line. They accelerate food spoilage, and and they can spread things like salmonella, listeria, which are common, and many, many others. So anytime you're doing any kind of food preservation project or frankly cooking, you always want to make sure you clean your work surfaces in your areas. Don't forget to clean things like your cell phone. So if many of us use your phone for recipes and things like that, making sure you're cleaning that surface. Tie back your hair, wearing an apron. The apron is not just there to protect your clothes from the food. They're also there to keep what's on your clothes out of the food. Gathering all your ingredients and utensils before you begin is helpful, and please make sure you always wash your produce. And you do not need to wash produce using bleach or anything like that. Running water and a scrub brush is sufficient. All right, so today's program, we're going to talk about 4 main things. The first is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about exactly what is pectin, because pectin is that key thing that makes jams and jellies and marmalade and all of those things have the texture that makes it jam and not syrup. Penny is going to chat about looking at low and no sugar and kind of how that works and how taking sugar out really changes the chemistry and what the results can be. Cindy actually is going to go through taking the same basic jam recipe, but making it 4 different ways. So changing a single variable and how that changes the outcome. And then finally, Tina is going to go through kind of the common, a little troubleshooting when things go wrong, sort of why that happens. So without further ado, I will begin a little chat about pectin. So different types of spreads get their texture in different ways. So jams, preserves, marmalades, conserves. So a conserve is essentially just a preserve that has nuts and dried fruit in it. Then it's a conserve. That's all fruit pieces that are crushed, either chopped or crushed, and suspended within a pectin gel. Jelly is fruit juice, so a clear, color, but a clear juice, no solids, suspended in a pectin gel. Fruit butters are different. Fruit butters are a pulp, or fruit pulp, that is concentrated by cooking. So essentially you're cooking out the liquid and just making it thicker and thicker. There is some natural pectin that exists in all fruit that's part of that, but we don't add or ever need to add pectin to fruit butters. So what exactly is pectin? So pectin, it's a natural soluble fiber that's found in all plant walls. It's what gives plants their structure, right? It's what holds plants together. It's naturally present in all fruits and vegetables, but the amounts vary greatly depending on the type of fruit or vegetable. And then within those plants themselves, different varieties have more or less natural pectin. And then ripeness. The more ripe a fruit or vegetable is, the less pectin it has. A commercial pectin, so the kind you buy at the store, is concentrated fruit pectin from plants, and all of it is made either from apple pomace, which is just the leftovers from making things like applesauce and apple juice, or citrus fruit. Right, so that's where pectin comes from, pectin, the natural product. Again, the issue when you're making jams and jellies is some things have more naturally and some don't. So apples, if you made cranberry sauce at Thanksgiving, you know how it just sort of, you just kind of cook the cranberries with some sugar and whatever flavorings, and it makes that cranberry jelly or sauce texture. That's because cranberries are full of natural pectin. There's no need to add any. It's like cook it a little bit, you're good to go. They're also acidic, so it's great. Citrus, very high in pectin. Quince, currants, gooseberries, apples, again, super high in pectin. Things like strawberries, cherries, peaches, apricots, most true berries, blackberries, raspberries are actually naturally lower in pectin, which is a bit of a challenge because those are the fruits that we tend to make these fruit spreads out of. So when we're doing things with apples or citrus, those kind of are much easier. Everything else, it gets a little dicey because you don't know. And again, because pectin naturally decreases as fruit ripens. So we want to make our spreads out of ripe fruit because it's the most flavorful, but then it has the least amount of pectin. And pectin is that thing we need to get that sort of gel-like texture that we want. That's the difference, again, between jelly and syrup. So how does pectin work? So pectin forms a network. So I always like to think of it, pectin is a net, not a sponge. So essentially what happens is pectin molecules are naturally dispersed in a fruit mixture. So we chop up fruit or you puree it or whatever your recipe tells you to do, right? Then we heat that up. We mix that with an acid, usually lemon juice or citric acid, and sugar. And then we heat all that up, right? The pectin dissolves in that liquid just through the heat. It starts to dissolve, it breaks down. And then sugar has an important role because sugar ties up water. Pectin molecules don't want to naturally reform that net. They actually repel each other. So sugar, though, ties up water. So think of them as floating around in the water. Well, the sugar's grabbing up the water, forcing those pectin molecules closer to each other. And then acid, in the form, again, of lemon juice or citric acid, then actually helps to break down that natural, so they normally want to naturally repel each other. And the presence of sufficient acid helps to sort of inhibit that repulsion. And so it also, again, helps them. So the combination of sugar and acid actually help pectin form that net that we need in order to create that gel. And then as that cools, so you mix all that stuff up, it gets all heated, we boil it, right? We bring it up to temperature, and then as it cools, it forms a net that's trapping the juice, the water, the fruit pieces, and creates that gel or suspension. Right? So that's what pectin does. That's its purpose. Again, it doesn't just soak up liquid the way a hydrocolloid would, which would be like if you've ever added chia seeds to something, or people have done, I know, with blueberry basil seeds or starch. They actually are like a sponge. They suck up the liquid, making it thicker. That's not the same thing as forming this gel net that's actually creating kind of a suspension more. So pectin does not work the same way that other kind of common thickening agents you might use in normal cooking, like adding cornstarch to a sauce or something like that. Pectin works differently, pardon me. So a few key terms to know as we're talking about this. So what is pectin? Again, plant fiber that forms a soft gel network. We talk about HM or high methoxyl pectin. That's pectin that it requires sugar and acid to gel. You think of that as like normal pectin. And then we have LM pectin or low methoxyl pectin, and that uses calcium instead of the sugar and the acid to form a gel. And that's actually important because we need that to make low or no sugar pectins. A couple safety terms, we'll talk about pH, which is a measure of acidity. Lower pH means more acidic. Water activity is another term you might hear us use. That has to do with how much water is available for microbes and reactions. Things like yeast, mold, and bacteria, just like you and I, need water. So when sugar, in particular, in the case of jams, gives us a lower water activity, it ties up the water, right? Sugar and salt both actually attract water, and that means that water is not available for things like yeasts and molds, which is why making jam, that's what part of the reason why jam is so shelf stable. If it's made correctly, using a tested recipe, and properly processed, you don't have the conditions in there for the yeast and molds to grow, right? They can't get enough water. And then the other term is functional ingredient. Those are ingredients that affect texture, safety, or both, as opposed to just being there for flavor. So, functional ingredients, what do? Pectin builds the gel network. Sugar helps high methoxyl pectin, so normal pectin, gel, and also lowers the water activity, which is a safety feature. Because again, keeping that water away from molds and yeast make it hard for molds, yeast, bacteria to live. Acid is used again to help high methoxyl pectin or regular pectin gel. It also lowers the pH, again, so more acidic. Not all, but most of the common sort of yeast, molds, etc., do not like a high acid environment. They like a low acid environment. So properly acidifying lowers that. This is the reason why you'll always hear like university extensions, master food preservers talk about using bottled lemon juice. We completely understand. There isn't a person, I don't think there's an MFP out there that would argue that bottled lemon juice tastes just as good as fresh lemons, or that it's, that we like it better. No, the reason we recommend, and we're always telling people to use bottled lemon juice, is because it has a predictable acidity. It is formulated to be consistent, so we know exactly how much acid we're adding. When you use fresh lemons vary wildly in their acidity, and not just from variety to variety, but from lemon to lemon. So when you use fresh lemon juice, you really can never know how much acid you're actually adding. So when it comes to using acid as a functional ingredient, we want to use bottled lemon juice because we know exactly how acidic it is. In a tested recipe, it's been formulated to add exactly that amount of bottled lemon juice to know that we're getting that pH low enough to create an environment that, one, is conducive to the forming of the gel by the pectin, but second, too acidic for things like listeria and other bacteria, yeasts, molds, and yeast and molds are non-harmless to grow in. So that's why we do that. You can substitute citric acid, like powdered citric acid, for bottled lemon juice. It's, you don't have to remember this, but it's a quarter teaspoon of citric acid is equal to a tablespoon of lemon juice. But I believe that's in our handout. So we'll get that later. And then last is calcium. So calcium also is used in low methoxyl pectins. So those are those low and no sugar pectins to help connect those pectin molecules. So they replace, they're doing the kind of the job, the calcium is doing the job that the sugar would have done to help that work. So when you change any of these functional ingredients, you're changing more than flavor. This is chemistry. And so when you start changing the variables, you're also going to potentially change the result. And that change may impact the overall safety of the final product, not just the texture. So sugar and acid are also preservatives. So I've mentioned this before, but sugar lowers water activity. It helps inhibit those microorganisms, and it helps high methoxyl regular pectin to gel, full sugar recipes. Acid lowers pH, again, making an environment that's less hospitable to microorganisms, but also is necessary to help those pectin molecules form that network. So again, those are the two things people always seem to want to, we get questions about it. I want to lower sugar and I want to use fresh lemon juice. And, I know I said this, but it bears repeating. You can lower sugar, and Penny's going to talk about that, but you need to do it correctly. And you really do need to have that predictable acidity. Again, not just to make sure your pectin works, but also to make sure that the end result is acidic enough that you're not going to do all this work, make all this delicious jam, put it in jars, you process it, you do everything, and then you go back a month later and there's mold growing on it. So it isn't just for flavor. It really is part of an overall preservation system. Acid is what determines the canning method. So most fruits are naturally somewhat acidic, but they, again, vary greatly depending on the fruit. And so for a lot of those, especially things that are already low in pectin, if they're also not super acidic, it just won't work. Like the jam or jelly won't work, right? So the final thing has to be acidic enough. And you can only water bath can or use atmospheric steam canning for high acid foods. So having it acidic also allows you to use again, steam canning, boiling water bath canning versus having to pressure can. That's why we have to pressure can things like green beans. They're low acid. We need to use pressure canning in order to make them safe. So jam is not a safety category. It's really about acidity. And the reason I mention this is that when you see things like onion jam, bacon jam, even tomato jam, a lot of those are actually low acid foods. Onions are low acid. Bacon is meat, it's low acid. So just because it has the word jam in it doesn't mean that you can water bath can or steam can it. It's really it's the acidity of the recipe. So when you're making those other kinds of jams, if you find recipes for onion jam or bacon jam or tomato jam, one, I would be a little, make sure you're getting it from a reliable, trusted source. And it should come with appropriate canning instructions, and know that for things like onion jam and bacon jam, it's likely that it's going to tell you to pressure can it. There are no, as far as I'm aware, tested recipes or I should say successfully tested recipes. When we say we don't have a tested recipe, that doesn't mean it's never been tested. It means it's not been tested and deemed safe for things like onion and bacon jam, because those are very low acid. Those are items you should make in small quantities, put in the fridge. A sealed jar does not mean that it's safe. Right? A sealed jar is just the end of the processing process. That's actually not what determines the safety or even the methodology of preparing the actual food. So fruit jams, jellies, conserves, all of those are pretty from a safety point of view, fairly foolproof. But when you start adding low acid things like onions and meat, that really does change everything. So let's talk a little bit about why you should use commercial pectin. You don't actually have to. You don't have to use commercial pectin. You can make jam without commercial pectin. And in fact, in our handout today, we're going to provide you with some more details about what I'm talking about. We have all the recipes that are mentioned today are going to be included in the handout. And we've included a recipe for making a jam without any commercial pectin. How do you do it without this? But there's actually some good reasons to go ahead and use commercial pectin. So again, commercial pectin is made from either citrus or apples, right? It is a natural product. But what it does is it provides that predictable gelling power. Because again, fruits and vegetables vary wildly. So when you don't add commercial pectin, you can try to put everything in place, follow a tested recipe, but the results may vary. Commercial pectin gives you kind of more guarantee. You get, usually requires far less cooking. A long cooked jam, which is what you have to do to make a no added pectin, can take upwards of 40 minutes versus 15 or 20. So usually requires less cooking. You get a higher yield, and you get more of that fresh fruit flavor. So if you're going to make a no-cook strawberry jam, you're going to cook those strawberries, for 40 minutes. They don't taste like fresh strawberries anymore. Still delicious, but they're not going to taste that way. So commercial pectin is not required for every jam or jelly, and you may find recipes that don't call for it all, and that's fine. But it does, again, make it a little more predictable and kind of an overall positive. If you're just starting out making jam, if it's not something you've done a lot of, I would highly recommend you start using a recipe that uses commercial pectin. You're going to be far more likely to have successful results right out of the gate, which is encouraging. It'll make you want to continue. So we talked a little bit about the two different kinds of pectin. So high methoxyl pectin, if you're buying commercial pectin, right? I'm not going to go into a lot of this, but for those of you who are really interested, what high methoxyl means is that there are more methyl ester groups. It has to do with just the makeup of the pectin itself. And again, that's the one we think of as normal. It'll sometimes say regular, full sugar. I have a picture here of one from Ball that just says classic pectin. Right? Low methoxyl has fewer of these modified sites. It uses calcium again to bridge the pectin chains. Low methoxyl, though, you can reduce the sugar or have no sugar. So if that's one of the things that's concerning, full sugar jam has a ton of sugar in it. Often it's 100%, like it's equal in weight to the fruit and the sugar. So lots of sugar. Lots of people want to lower that sugar. You want less, maybe for health, maybe for just flavor. Then you're moving into the low methoxyl. And those are usually sold as either, they'll be low sugar, no sugar. It'll say it on the thing. Or something you'll hear us reference actually quite a bit today, Pomona's pectin. And Pomona's pectin lets you do kind of any of those things. You can add lots of sugar. You can add no sugar. You can add sugar substitutes. It's very flexible. So the thing, though, is that these are two different things, and they cannot just be substituted. So choose your recipe first, then buy the pectin. Figure out what kind the recipe calls for, and then use that kind. And then one thing I can't remember. Oh, I do mention it here. Great. I don't want to forget. I'm almost finished with them. I know. Hopefully you find this interesting. I do. So some final takeaways. Again, pectin is for texture. The recipe is for safety. So please make sure you're following a good tested recipe. If you're wondering, like, how do I know? Any recipe coming from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, from a university extension site, all those are always going to be tested recipes. A good recipe will have things like it'll tell you exactly how to process it. It will include things like adjusting processing time for altitude. All of that kind of stuff should be included in a good recipe. Remember that jar size and process time matter. Don't just start changing jar sizes. And the other thing that is we do not recommend, don't double recipes. Most jam recipes need to be made in that quantity. When you double it, the problem is it starts to take longer and longer to get it up to temperature, to get that chemical reaction to take place. Things can start burning. It's hard to keep that ratio of acid, pectin, sugar, calcium all in order. So again, follow the recipe. If the recipe says it can be doubled, great. But if it doesn't, make multiple batches. And then the last thing is that commercial pectin comes in kind of two forms. Most of the commercial pectins that you can find in most grocery stores, stores like Target and Walmart will carry it. Hardware stores often carry canning supplies, including selling pectin. Most of it's powdered, but you can buy liquid pectin. And liquid pectin is fine. There's nothing wrong with it if you're going to make the recipe as it calls for, because it's usually called, like, it's sold in pouches, and you usually use like one pouch per recipe generally. But the thing about liquid pectin is once you open it, like the pouch, you have to use it. And it's hard to make smaller batches. It's hard to adjust it a little bit. It's hard to sort of make any kind of modifications to. So liquid pectin's great. Powdered pectin is more flexible. So it's your choice, but again, and you're going to want to use whatever kind of pectin your recipe calls for. But if you have a choice between a recipe that calls for powdered pectin or liquid pectin, just remember with the liquid pectin, you're really going to need to make it exactly like it says. And anything you open, you're using, and it also expires. So now you know. It's just easier to scale down when you use powdered. So with that, Robin, do we have questions?
We have some questions, but I think that we might want to move directly on to Penny, and we can take some questions at the end of Penny's.
Excellent. That Robin's a diplomatic way of saying I talked too long. So Penny, we're going to let you go to talk to you about low and no sugar pectin.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. So my section here is really stems from my desire to reduce that sugar intake, because as Paige mentioned, most of these recipes almost have a 50-50 ratio of sugar to fruit. And I was like, that's a lot. However, a lot of the artificial sweeteners can leave a really disagreeable aftertaste, or they can become bitter over time, or they just lose the gel, or you get crystals in your product. So what I'm going to be talking about today, I want you to understand, is my personal preference, but there are other products that offer the ability to do low sugar or no sugar products, jams and jellies. Next slide, please. So I think there you go. Is that the right one? Okay. You're fast on the trigger, Paige.
Sorry.
So it's all right. So I discovered a new substitute called allulose. It has about the 70% sweetness of sugar. It is a natural product. It comes from fruits such as dates and figs and a lot of other things. It's more expensive. It does have a very minimal aftertaste. Now, there's some people that are super tasters that'll go, no, there's a bitter there, or they don't like it. But it's worth a try if you're looking to meet these goals of reducing sugar. What I do appreciate about it is heat stable, which means it maintains that sweetness level through the boiling process of the jams as well as the canning process, whether you're doing boiling water canning or atmospheric steam canning. It has a very low glycemic index for those of you that are looking because you would like to provide a product for a diabetic person, or you are looking to make more, your preserves less high in carbs because of adding so much sugar. I really do like that it has a natural browning capability. I've made marshmallows with allulose. I've made homemade caramels with allulose. It does brown very quickly, so you have to be cautious with that. But it really does help to mimic that traditional texture that Paige was talking about in our jams and jellies. So that's a consideration. Next slide, please. So when we want to look at this type of using allulose, there's some other considerations to take in mind, and that is what happens with sugar. Now, Paige has already explained this as Sugar is very important because it lowers that water activity. It's an antioxidant, keeps those jams really pretty. This is an example of a really nice jar of apple jelly. It's got a beautiful color. But if you don't use the traditional sugar, then over time, those plant pigments and stuff can fade. They oxidize, especially, if you like to see jewels in your windowsill and you store your jam up there, not a good idea. It will fade out over time. It doesn't mean that the product becomes unsafe. It just doesn't look as pretty. So the next slide will show you an example of this. This is actually, if you go to the next slide page, is an example of one of my jams. This happens to be a grape jam. And this is a process that you can see when you use low sugar, no sugar in your jams and jellies. You get this thing called syneresis or weeping. And this is not uncommon. You'll see syneresis is when that gel network kind of collapses and you get water or liquid. Think about when you take a scoop of yogurt, you come back a little bit later, it's got a little puddle in the bottom of it. Same thing with dairy products, etc. This happens frequently. That's why you shake up the ketchup jar. But it's common in low sugar jams because we don't use a traditional sugar. So this is an example. This particular jelly jam, grape jam, it sure doesn't look good, but it didn't taste too bad, but I couldn't handle that mess. So next slide, please. So what we're going to work on here is using allulose with Pomona pectin. Now, Pomona pectin is one that you saw in the slides that Paige offered before. It's very good for low sugar jams because it uses that calcium to build that pectin matrix, not sugar. So allulose in combination with that gives it some body, gives it that sweetness without raising your blood sugar if you're looking for that. It has acid balance of that 3.3. It strengthens that gel network. And what I really like about it is that when you use allulose, it's very quick. When you get it up to boil, you're done. You don't have to wait and get it and boil it for another minute or two. It really does help to preserve that integrity of that texture and flavor of your jams and jellies. You do need to remember, because we're using a different process here, you want to make sure that you understand allulose is not a functional food. Like Paige said before, this is a nice flavoring agent, but it's not in the function of making your product safe. Okay, next slide, please. So from here, second thing I really like about Pomona pectin is it's 100% pure citrus pectin. There are no additives. There are no fillers or things that keep it from clumping. There's no dextrose. Therefore, if you treat it kindly, it has an indefinite shelf life. So I really like that because I have a tendency to buy in bulk. And if I don't have a good jamming season, I can end up with a lot of extra, especially with box pectins that have an expiration date on them. Pomona does not. It also is a little more economical in the sense that the box can work with up to 16 cups of fruit, whereas the other low sugar, no sugar standard pectins process only 4 to 6 cups of fruit. You also have, if you don't want to use allulose, you can use any type of other sugar substitute. And that can include honey. That can include, if you have your favorite, if you like monk fruit or if you like erythritol, they can all be used with Pomona pectin. In the handout that you receive after we finish the presentation today, there's kind of a chart there that shows some of the pros and cons of using different mixes of those types of sugar sweeteners. And it's very much a personal choice, very much a personal preference. The last thing that I really like about Pomona pectin is, as Paige mentioned before, when you're working with a recipe, you're working with these exact amounts. Pomona does give you the flexibility of being able to double a recipe easily or even have a recipe. It's very easily scalable. Okay, next slide, please. See where I am. So my recommendations here, because I've been fussing around with this for a while, is really look at doing small batches, especially if you like to mix your sweeteners, because that allows you some flexibility of like, oh, this didn't really work out. You're not wasting 6 or 8 cups worth of fruit or fruit product of any kind. You can make it in a small batch. Pomona has what they call a master jam formula. That's a really good foundation that allows you to kind of experiment a little bit with how this pectin will work with your combinations of sugar substitutes. You can mix your sweeteners together if you like. I've even done it where I've done like 25% of standard sugar, okay, right off the shelf, and allulose. Now, I've cut the sugar significantly, but I'm adding in a little bit of that water activity that Paige had talked about before. Is it longer shelf stable? Do I have less weeping, etc.? That's an experimentation, but as long as you follow the recipes that are available from Pomona, they do a very nice job. They've got incredible resources on the website. All of that is in the handout. Don't worry about it. You'll have all of that so you can go and review it yourself. One of the things that is a great recommendation, if you have the space, is as you make these artificially sweetened pectin, artificially sweetened jams, put them in the freezer. They will last beautifully. They will keep their color. You really will prevent any of that weeping, and you're going to have a great jam or jelly coming out of the freezer, no problem. The last one that really helped me is I would put my artificially sweetened or allulose sweetened jams and jellies in those little 4-ounce jars, because 4 ounces, I can get through that in jam or jelly in a week or two. One thing I do notice with using artificial sweeteners, it doesn't matter which ones, it does shorten the shelf life. And when they're opened, if I had it in a half-pint jar, if I did not eat that artificially sweetened jam or jelly within 2 to 3 weeks, I would start to get mold, because now you've introduced, open air to an open jar of jams or jellies made with artificial sweeteners. So that's why small jars makes it quick and easy if you put it in the freezer, great. If you have the room, you're always processing these by the recipe that's provided, whether it's hot water bath canning or your atmospheric steam canner. It makes it a really great way to balance some of that sugar. So those of you that have made jams and jellies for a while, I don't know, I used to always just break my heart. I'd have 4 cups of grape pulp or grape juice, and I'm putting in 6 cups of sugar, and it just doesn't feel right. So this was a great alternative for using Pomona pectin as giving lots of flexibility, but there are many other products out there. You saw some photographs of that earlier from commercial producers that allow you to make low and or no sugar jams and jellies. You just have to follow those recipes very sharply, because that will make sure that you have a really good product. So I'm done with my section. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think, Robin, you said that we had some?
Yes, we do. Do you use liquid or powdered allulose?
I use powdered just because I like the granular, and when I make cookies, I love to roll it in it because it gets all nice, crispy, and brown. It acts very much like traditional cane or beet sugar, the sugar that you buy, C&H sugar off the shelf.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to Cindy.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I, like many of you, want to know, what does it taste like with all of these different options of sweetener? And recently I decided to test it and have a whole jam session, making full sugar versus low sugar versus artificial sweetener, and using honey. So when I initially decided to do this, I knew I was going to be doing a lot. I 100% wanted to just know what tasted the best or what texture was the best, for what my preferences are. So in this testing, I decided to use strawberries. But before we get to the results and kind of everything that happened, I did go to a whole different level. If I can get the next slide, please. So in the recipes that I used, it was the same base recipe. Um, I quickly realized after processing the first batch how long it was going to take me to do 4 different batches. And so when I started, I was using my potato masher and crushing those strawberries as the recipe called for. But, I thought I was going to be a little bit smarter, and decided, oh, I could just puree them in the inside of the blender. Um, Quickly realizing that, oh, am I really saving time? Is there a reason why the recipe didn't tell me I could do blending? And what I ended up finding out was, yes, there's a reason why it didn't ask me or tell me to do a blender. Um, what ended up happening is, as I doubled my recipe, I decided to do one whole set of batches with all 4 sweeteners, and then one set of batches with the same 4 sweeteners, blended versus crushed. So I, instead of doing 16 jars, ended up doing 32 jars. And I found quickly that the blended was much more work than sitting and mashing. And the reason for that was that as you're using the blender, it actually aerates your puree. Um, and when you go to boil, it creates double, if not almost triple, the amount of foam in that processing part before you can it. And that to me was much, much worse, um, in trying to scrape it off and take out all of that so that I didn't have a lot of air in my cans itself. So I found that mashing it was definitely the better way to go, um, as far as time saving, especially since I really quadrupled the work that I initially was starting out to do. Um, 100%, you can see the difference. It looks like there's more air in my picture here versus the blender, but the reality was very different once I was processing. If I can have the next slide. So the first kind of base to judge everything else as far as sweeteners and taste and texture, I used regular sugar. This is a jar of the crushed strawberries, and it definitely was the darkest in color, kind of more true red, deep colored red. And the texture was smooth. It was, like cake gel, nice and gelled, held the shape and then spreads out gradually as time goes on. It definitely had the strongest sweetness test. And in my family, because as I made myself have more work, we decided to have what's called the factor and ended up using that as our base, for testing the others against it. Next slide. The next one that I did was using half the amount of sugar. Um, Really, I didn't see a big difference in color, at least not noticeable. The texture, it definitely did not hold the shape as well initially. It spread much quicker. That's probably because it had more liquid in it and the sugar did not pull as much water out. And the taste was definitely not as strong as far as sweetness. You could still taste the strawberry, um, but it definitely still had a factor in my family. And this was having my uh, son and my husband help be my taste testers, which was really fun, as a family activity for us to do. Next slide. So in the next batch that I did, it was using artificial sweetener. In this, I definitely saw a slightly lighter color, in my final product. It definitely was a little bit thicker, in gel, and the taste was definitely not as sweet and strong. I ended up using sucrose as my artificial sweetener. Just found the cheapest at Walmart and kind of went with that. The notable difference was that it definitely had more foam than using sugar, as well as it was thicker and slightly more tacky. Um, and when I put it on a spoon, it held shape the longest. So as it rested, it finally started to slide and spread, but it was definitely the longest as far as holding the texture itself. Next slide. The last one that I did was using only honey. This picture is actually of the blended um, in the spoon. It was just slightly lighter than the full sugar. I really, we had to like hold them side by side, take a picture and zoom in, and then we could see that coloration difference. To the naked eye, it was not that big of a difference. The texture was definitely thinner in the crushed strawberries versus in the complete process blended. It was, as you can see, much more formed and kind of thicker as far as the foam was concerned. Um, the taste was not as strong as sweetness, and 100% completely and totally used that honey-esque flavor. You can definitely taste that difference that it's honey versus using sugar. Next slide. Using artificial sweetener, you can see the color difference. It was slightly lighter, definitely a thicker gel, and the taste was not as strong in sweetness. Cooking definitely had the most foam, thicker and slightly more tacky. And again, the spoon rest. This is again using the blended strawberries. You can see it almost looks like it's a mousse. It's definitely not a mousse, but that's kind of how it presented. In all of these recipes, I was using the ball pectin, which is what my recipe called for both sugar, using the regular pectin and then the no sugar ball pectin. Next slide. And so we had a winner jam with dinner. In conclusion, you can see here some of the processed cans that I did. Mashing definitely was less work. So if you're thinking about changing something and the recipe doesn't call for it, I learned my lesson. Um, and then 100% full sugar by far was the favorite, but in using not full sugar, the artificial sweetener was the one that was gone first from my cupboards. That disappeared very quickly with my family. So take that as you may. I personally love the flavor of sugar. I think it's the most traditional and makes me think of all of the fun I had growing up um, eating jams. But the artificial sweetener was definitely a big hit. So that's what I have for you guys today. Did we
Thank
have any
you.
questions?
That's such a good.
I think we're okay on questions, so we're going to
Okay.
turn over to Tina.
Great, thank you. Good morning,
Oh,
everyone. Oh,
for
go ahead.
Tina, very quickly,
Yeah.
we are answering questions. If you're interested, you can look on the question and answer, and we are answering questions while the talks are going on. So please visit the Q&A if you have questions too. Thanks.
And I need to jump in with a quick
Yes.
apology because I was making some changes right before we began, and I think I deleted Tina's title slide. So my question. So Tina is going to present to us on when things go awry. So my apologies, Tina.
That's okay. So we're going to
Jumped
talk
right
about
into the first one.
yeah, no worries. Common problems in troubleshooting. So what happens when mold is in your jam or jelly? The possible causes are usually related to improper processing. I know a lot of these themes you've already heard in the presentation, but really important to bring up again. So when you improperly process in a water bath canner or steam canner, this allows the yeasts and molds to grow on your jam or jelly. So you want to be sure that you're processing according to a tested recipe. You want to make sure that you're always using new lids when you go to can. Now, I know a lot of us, myself included, I reuse the lids for just storage of like a little extra salad dressing or some fruit or whatnot, and that's perfectly fine. But when you're canning, you want to use brand new lids to make sure that you get the proper seal. You want to test those lids before storage in a cool, dry, dark place. And you want to make sure you're refrigerating your jars after opening to prevent that mold growth. Another possible cause is too little sugar. You cannot change just any recipe to low sugar. As mentioned prior, if you want to use less sugar in your recipes, you need to follow a recipe for low sugar in jams. So is this safe to eat if there's mold growth? Even if I just pick off that piece at the top, it all looks good. No, the answer is no, you may not. It is unsafe to eat and should be discarded. Do not scoop off the mold and continue to eat the jar. Next slide, please. Is your jam too soft or runny? If you have runny jam, something has interfered with the gelling capacity of the pectin. So a common cause is overcooking or undercooking the product. Both of those scenarios obviously impact the gelling capacity of the pectin. So once again, really be sure, especially when you're starting out, to use a tested recipe exactly as it's written and really pay attention to those cooking times. Don't go a little bit under, a little bit over because you think it looks like it might be done. Really set a timer and stick with it. As we mentioned also, making more than one batch of a jam at a time is not really recommended. I know some of the like Pomona pectin, you can double the recipe or half the recipe, but in general, if you have that bumper crop of strawberries or apricots, you really want to make a single batch and multiple single batches if you have a lot of that fruit. Too large of it makes it really hard with the heat distribution and for the process to really work to get that gel to be how we like our jam a little bit firm. And lastly, don't move the product too soon. And what we mean is we recommend once your product is finished in the jars, let it set for 12 to 24 hours. Don't disturb it. Don't try the lid to see if it's sealed. And don't pick it up and jiggle it because any of that jiggling could prevent the proper set. So just let it set there. I know it's tempting. Let it set and look at it the next day. Is it still safe to eat? Perfectly safe to eat. Perfectly safe to eat. Next slide, please. Do you have fruit float in your jam? This, as you can see, there's a lot of fruit at the top, and at the bottom it looks like jelly. This is my apricot product. So to prevent this, you want to use ripe fruit as it contains less air than underripe fruit. You want to crush, chop, or mash the fruit uniformly. And as we learned from Cindy, you don't want to put it in a blender. You want to do that by hand for best results. And you want to be sure not to undercook your jam or jelly. The fruit really needs to come to a rapid boil. So a low heat for a longer time isn't the same as a short time to that rapid boil. So really make sure you're following those directions. And is it safe to eat? Yeah, perfectly safe to eat. Just give it a gentle stir when you open it and redistribute that fruit. It'll be great. Next slide, please. Do you have bubbles in your jam or jelly? As you can see in this photo, there's some little air bubbles in there. And that just indicates that there's air has become trapped in the jar. So to prevent this, a couple things. Cindy also mentioned that sometimes you get that foam in your sauce pot when you're making your jam or jelly. So you just want to try as best you can to remove that from the sauce pot before you ladle your product into the jars. Once the jars are filled, you want to go around the edges with a little chopstick or something similar to try to release as many air bubbles as possible before putting the lid on. And don't let the product start to cool or gel while it's in that sauce pot. Because once it starts to gel in the pot and you transfer it with the ladle into the jars, you're probably going to get a lot more of that trapped air that you're not going to be able to get out with the chopstick. So we want to work quickly but safely. And lastly, these bubbles may indicate spoilage. If the air bubbles are moving up through your jam, like in a sparkling water, the product is likely spoiled and you're going to want to discard it. So is it safe to eat? Yeah, usually. If it's stationary bubbles like what you see here in this photo, and a lot of jams have this, it's perfectly safe. But if the bubbles are moving at all, assume it's spoiled and discard it. Next slide, please. Does your jam or jelly have crystals? This is a jar of lemon jelly. And as you can see, there's some crystals and undissolved sugar in there. Um, One thing you want to do is to make sure when you're using the tested recipe that you're really following the directions for the sugar. Make sure, even though this is lemon jelly, sometimes I think the tendency is, oh, it's lemon, it's going to be sour, I'll add a little extra sugar. There really is a science involved with making the jams and the jelly. So you really want to stick with that ingredients list with the appropriate amounts so that your jelly comes out nice. So make sure you're not using too much sugar. And then also in that sauce pot again, sometimes around the edges of it, the sugar will kind of stick to the sides and be undissolved. So really, when you're putting your jam or jelly into the jars, just make sure you're not scraping the sides with your ladle or a spatula. Just leave that undissolved sugar. Go for the stuff at the bottom that's dissolved nice and properly, and it shouldn't be a problem at all. And once again, also, the crystals could be because the mixture was cooked too slowly or too long. You really want to be bringing it to that rapid boil. It's so important to dissolve the sugars and then immediately remove it from the heat once the gelling point is reached. And is it safe to eat with the crystals? It's perfectly safe to eat. When you spread it on your baguette or your croissant, you won't even know that it had the sugar crystals in it. Next slide, please. Are your jellies cloudy? This is 2 jars of lemon jelly. The one on the left looks perfectly clear. The one on the right, again, cloudiness. So a couple reasons for this. One could be unripe fruit, using too much unripe fruit, because unripe fruit may contain excess starches, which will cloud up your product, especially when you're making jellies. An imperfect strain, which is what happened to the jar on the right here. So when you're making jelly and you are separating that juice out of the fruit and you have it in the jelly bag to drain, don't squeeze the jelly bag to get more of the juice out, because what happens is some of that product will also strain out and it'll really cloud up your jelly, which is what I did here. So just let it naturally drain out for a clearer product. And lastly, this doesn't happen frequently, but it certainly could. If the seal is not on the jar tightly, the cloudiness could really indicate that the product is spoiled, especially if when you put your jelly in storage, it looks like the jar on the left and it's clear. And then when you go to remove it, it's cloudy. You should assume that it's spoiled. Don't try to sample it or anything. So is it safe to eat? In general, cloudy jelly is fine, but if the seal is compromised in any way, you're going to want to make sure you discard that jam or jelly. Next slide, please. And is my jam, why is it darker in color? Why does it look normal? So this is 2 jars of strawberry jam that I made, both of them. One reason could be because you overcooked your product. So once again, you want to make sure you're doing a single batch, because it really does change the process when you try to double the recipe, and the cooking times will be off a bit and you're just not really sure how to follow that recipe anymore if you double it. So make sure you're making small quantities, cooking them rapidly, and avoiding those long boils. And then also, we recommend that that the jams and jellies are best consumed within a year if they've had proper storage. Most of them are certainly good beyond that year, but what can happen is the products can darken a little. And while they're perfectly safe to eat, many times, though, the flavor is not as strawberry-ish or apricot-y or whatever that flavor is of your jam. So perfectly safe to eat, just not top quality flavor. Next slide, please. And when all else fails with your jams and jellies, just make Pop-Tarts with it. You won't notice the bubbles, the cloudiness, or the runny jam, and they're so delicious. My family loves it when I take my common problem jams and turn them into Pop-Tarts. Do we have any questions?
I love that. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. We actually are, I think we're still going through the Q&A, and we'll try to get to all of our questions. We're going a little over time, totally my fault, but I got too excited about pectin. We did want to do a quick backseat. I think there was a reference made earlier in the presentation about monk fruit. And Penny, you want to?
Yes, I wanted to make sure that I clarified that, and thank you for my other MFPs bringing it to my attention. I never use monk fruit, so I want to make sure that everybody understands that monk fruit used with no sugar pectin really should be used with a freezer-based recipe. And that is just, I think, more in my experience with when you cook monk fruit, it tends to go bitter. So it is not recommended to use it as an artificial sweetener in working with jams and jellies. And I want to just clarify that. Thank you, Paige.
I'll make a last quick notification too, because we've been talking a lot today. There's a ton of recipes. We have some great recipes in our handout, but we do want to remind you always to follow tested recipes. The pectin manufacturers do have recipes available, but you do want to make sure you're differentiating between recipes that are provided by users. So for example, there might be forums and things like that where, whatever Paige's Pectin Company has a forum, and we let people upload all their recipes. And that's, great community, but those are not tested recipes. That's just people like you and me saying, here's what I did. You want to make sure you're using those recipes that have been specifically tested for the specific type of pectin, the specific type of sugar, and again, a great place to always start with all this, if you're just like, I don't know where to begin, is the National Center for Home Food Preservation. Their website is extensive and great, and they also have an excellent book called So Easy to Preserve. And it's nothing but just really high quality tested recipes, and really, I think, just such an excellent place to start. And that's really kind of where we all begin. And then our own website actually has a whole bunch of great recipe resources for free. So on that note, I think what we'll do to be respectful of everyone's time is I'm going to go through our last couple of slides, and then we'll see if we can get to those last Q&A questions. But I do want to let people who are, you may have other things you want to do today. So I want to get through this, and then we can let you go and maybe stay for another minute or two and see if we can answer some of these last questions. So a couple things. So for upcoming events, if you enjoyed this or want more events, you can follow us on Eventbrite. We have a link here. There's also a link to this included in our handout. But if you've got your phone handy, the QR code's right there. We have 2 great classes coming up. One on Tuesday on cucumber pickles at home, doing quick, fermented, and shelf-stable cucumber pickles. And then on August 4th, we're going to be doing preserving zucchini. So sweet and savory possibilities. If you've ever been curious about zucchini flour, this is the class for you. We don't have it listed here. It is on our Eventbrite page, though. We have a tomato basics class also coming up on August 14th or 15th. I can't remember the exact date, but it is posted 15th. In Eventbrite. 15th. Thanks, Elena. Again, if your garden runneth over, or those sales at your local store for tomatoes are tempting you, this would be a great place to start. And then we do record all of our classes, and we have them available for you to watch for free. And we do have a link for that also included in our handout. So you can go and watch. I know in the Q&A, somebody had a great question about whether or not we do any basic how to make jam. And the answer is yes, we have done those classes, and we have them all recorded and available at no charge. Then the second Wednesday of every month, we do our English language Ask a Master Food Preserver from 7 to 8 p.m. Pacific time. It's a live Zoom session. There's a panel of Master Food Preservers, and we're just there to answer whatever questions you have. So we'd love for you to join us. And on the 4th Wednesday of every month, we do from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time, we have a Spanish language Ask a Master Food Preserver. So we encourage you to join one or both of those. And then last, we also have a helpline. So please, if you have written questions, you're welcome to send them into our helpline, and we're happy to send you a response right to your email. And then, of course, all the other ways to contact with us. We have a monthly newsletter, Save the Season. We do articles all about all kinds of topics. This month we have, I think there's July, I know there was one on fruit roll. We are making our own fruit leathers. We had about more pickled things. All kinds of information there. Again, it's free, comes right to your email, your inbox. And then always follow us on Facebook and Instagram just for more information, both about upcoming events and classes are always posted there. And then also just good research-based home food preservation information that you might like to follow. And with that, when you leave today, you will get a brief survey is going to pop up in your browser. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment and give us some of your feedback. That really helps us to improve the quality of our classes and have a better idea of who you are so that we can make sure that we're delivering kind of what we think or hope is the best information for you. And then that pop-up acknowledgement also include a link to the class handout. So thank you for your time and interest. Again, happy preserving. I know we have a few questions still, so maybe we can take like 5 minutes and see if we can answer those. And if not, thank you very much. We so appreciate your time and your attention today. You have a great day and look forward to seeing you in the next class.
I have a couple of questions that I didn't get to. One is, and I wasn't sure I understood it. It's while making orange jam, should we make the juice first or can we cook it after peeling? I assume that they are looking to have a non-pectin recipe to take advantage of the skin in order to do the pectin, but they were concerned about the bitter taste that might occur.
So I followed recipes for both pectin-based and non-pectin-based, like orange jams. And I know Elena actually makes quite a bit of jam. But and the answer is going to be you're going to want to follow the directions in a tested recipe. They often, when you are making citrus-based jams and jellies, will have a blanching process. So the recipe will tell you what to do, but you take the peels, you kind of boil them for a minute, throw that water away, boil them again. And that helps to remove those bitter compounds. So you don't end up with like bitter marmalade or bitter orange jam. And the recipe will tell you what to do. You wouldn't take a recipe for strawberry jam and just substitute in oranges, or a recipe for apple jelly and just use orange juice instead. You want to find a recipe that's specific for citrus fruits, because those recipes will address that bitterness issue. And I'll tell you, some of them you just chop up the fruit, some of them you juice the fruit first, and it's going to depend on the recipe you're following. But most of them include some step. I know all the ones I've ever followed always have some step. And I want to say the one from the National Center also includes a blanching process, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
We also have a question about, do you have any tips for making jam from, oh, somebody must have answered it and it disappeared. Okay. I want to add amaretto to my orange marmalade jam. If I add too early, it boils off, but too late thins the jam. When should I add it and should I add it? Yep. Are you still there? Can you hear me?
I can give you from my experience. It's a very fine line. With my recipe, it would tell me that I put my little bit of alcohol, in my case, it was brandy. It was in the last bit of when I boiled before I actually put it in the jar. But that's following the recommendations of that tested recipe. If you're just adding it as a flavoring, I would be very cautious of just that problem. So if your recipe has it in there, and if that would be your best option, I think, to avoid, you get the flavor, but it doesn't get all boiled off in just that one last minute or so.
And I think that's it. Somebody asked about, oh, I want to try passion fruit jelly. Any tips for preparation? How to deal with pulps and seeds? Anybody has made passion fruit jelly?
I've not made passion fruit jelly, but dealing with seeds, that's where you can put it in a sieve and sort of gently push it through. You have to be careful you don't break all the seeds, or a food mill. Those really are great tools for remove from it. Because I've made a passion fruit curd that was a freezer recipe, not a shelf stable recipe, and I found that a food mill was the best option. The first time I did it, I just put it through a sieve, which was an effort. I won't lie, it works, but it was an effort. So I'm trying to think. Those are the two things that's been successful for me. we grow passion fruit in our backyard, so always trying to deal with passion fruit.
Okay, and Rosanna asked about where is the survey, and the survey will pop up in your browser after you leave today's presentation. So just wait a second, it'll come. And then once you complete the survey, you can get the handout. And I think that's everything.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and end the session, and we look forward to seeing you at our next presentation.